So welcome everyone for the first edition of Book Club. We're honored to have author Safia Elhillo, who is a Sudanese-American poet known for her written and spoken poetry. Safia received a BA from the Gallatin School at New York University and an MFA in poetry from the New School. Safia has performed all over the world. She is a renowned author, and today we are going to be talking about her, I think her latest book, Home is Not a Country, the 2021 U.S. National Book Award nominee in the category for Young People's Literature. Safia, welcome to Afikra's Book Club.
Great. Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Sorry about that. I had to make you co-host. Welcome. I'm so excited to have you here. Safia, before we get started with the book, let's talk a little bit about you. Do you remember when you first started writing poetry and when you first considered yourself a poet?
So I think my first ever poem was written for a school assignment when I was maybe in the 3rd grade, and it was a poem about a cat written in the shape of a cat. And then I took many years off after that achievement. And then I think I found my way back to it maybe early on in high school. But I don't know that I thought of myself as a poet at that point. I just, was having big adolescent feelings. I needed a space to process those feelings without the direct incrimination that keeping a diary could lead to.
Yeah.
So if anyone were to find my poems about a boy that had hurt my feelings or whatever when I wasn't supposed to be dating, I would be like, Mama, it's just a poem. So that was the strategy behind that. And then maybe when I was 16 or 17, I started going to open mics. I grew up in DC, so I started going to open mics in the DC area. I joined the DC Youth Slam team. We were talking earlier pre-recording about performance, so my background is in performance. Performance is what was my entry point into the world of poems, really. And it was also my entry point into the community of poets. And so once I felt like this is my community, these are my people, it then became very easy for me to call myself a poet because I just counted myself as a poet among other poets.
So because this is a book club as opposed to our normal conversation series, I want to spend the large majority of the time talking about Home is Not a Country. And so let's start with just maybe a brief overview of when you started working on this project. And if you were to sort of describe it to a 14-year-old, what you think this project is about, what would you say in your words, what the project's about?
So I started working on this project, I think it must have been 2018. My plan was never to write a novel. I have never written anything that is not just a poem before this. I still don't know that I necessarily know how to write a novel. I wrote this, but if I were to repeat the process, I don't know that I could tell you how it happened. And it all started with a conversation with Chris Myers, who runs the imprint that publishes the book. He, was trying to gather some authors, specifically poets, for his new Young People's Literature imprint. And he was like, would you ever write a novel? And I was like, no. Thank you so much, but no, thank you. And, I was ready to just end the conversation there, but he was very patient with me. And just through a lot of the conversations we were having, it turned out that the tools that it takes to write a novel in verse, at least, I can't speak, I still have never written a full sentence in my life, so I can't speak to the other thing. But a novel in verse, he was able to convince me that the skills or the tools required to make that thing were tools that I had already spent time cultivating. And so that he wasn't asking me to do anything that I didn't already know how to do, which is very helpful because I am not particularly good at doing things that I feel like I'm not very good at, which is, I think, So I wrote, well, first I was like kind of just picking away at it on my computer in secret. I would not talk to anyone about it. I was like so embarrassed to be attempting to do this thing that I felt like I had no claim to, which is pretty counter to just what my life as a writer has been like. I'm usually so not shy about
you exude confidence.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's usually that I'm generally not, I'm usually pretty good at asking for help is the thing. And I don't know what it was, but this time I was like, I have to like in total secret master the form of the novel. And only when I have mastered it can I like emerge and show people that I've been working on this, which is just, I mean, first of all, that would have taken forever. There would still be no book. And also I don't really have a relationship to mastery. And so I don't know why I decided that this was the time to like suddenly become an expert. And just, you know, at that point, so many of my friends were venturing into fiction. My friend Liz Acevedo has like a bajillion novels in verse at this point. And I don't know why it took me so long to just be like, hello, my friends. Like, similarly to how you all explained to me what a double sonnet is in the group chat the other day, could you explain to me what makes plot work? Because I have this collection of pages and it's like 5 pages about the color of the leaves, but unfortunately nothing is happening in my book and I don't know how to make stuff happen.
Interesting. So it's like a mechanical challenge. You were like, functionally, how can I move?
Oh, hold on, I froze a little bit. But yeah, I don't really, plot is hard for me because I don't inherently have a relationship to cause and effect in my writing. The logic in the world of a poem is, I think, a lot looser and freer, and the cause and effect, I think, is a lot easier to invent. But when I was thinking through it in terms of plot and event, it just was a way of thinking and a way of writing that I was not used to. Even like down to the simplest terms where one of my friends who I was talking to was like, okay, well, what do you want to happen in the book? And I was like, I actually don't know that I know what the verb happen means. The sky is blue, that's happening, you know? And so I think that was the main tool that I kind of had to import, was just how to think in terms of events and how to think in terms of cause and effect. And in order to get there, I didn't come to that myself. I still don't necessarily know how to do that by myself. I had to seek out my community of peers and teachers and be like, okay, guys, it's not a secret anymore. I am attempting to do this thing that I am deeply a beginner at, and I'm so embarrassed by it, but I need help. Will you please help me?
Yeah, because what's interesting about the plot of this book of the novel is that it's not expected, right? There is this Doctor Strange element to it that's completely just like, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's like very, very unexpected and quite literally transportive. And so I'm curious, how quickly into writing it did you happen upon that idea?
So there were some elements that I knew pretty early on that I wanted to include. So the time travel was part of the idea
from the beginning with. Cool.
Yeah. And the like arriving into the scene of the photograph was a very early idea. Which almost made it more difficult. I had the easiest time writing this book when it was just like, I didn't know what was going to happen and I had to just follow the characters and their decisions into those situations. But trying to kind of write around these decisions I'd made in advance of actually writing anything was like trying to make a garment fit that didn't particularly fit. But eventually we got there. But at first I was like, oh no, will there be no time travel in this book? Because I can't figure out how to. It also, the thing that nobody told me is that time travel is hell to write. It's like math. I'd never want to do it again. But I think it was beneficial to me in this case to go in with kind of the like stupid confidence of the beginner, because I didn't know that it was difficult to write time travel. No one told me. I'd never written time travel before. I didn't know that it was math. And so I went in with all the confidence in the world, being like, yeah, obviously, just, you know, just a little time travel. And only when I was in it was I like, oh, this is hell, but I'm committed to it now.
Okay, so I want to play some of the, I told you before we started the call, I'm going to play part of the audiobook. And this is you reading. We have the pleasure of you reading it. But just as a structure, the novel is split into 4 parts: a prologue, part 1, the other side, part 2, old country, and part 3, home is not a country. And is made up of a collection of small poems. So we're going to start with one of them. So the first one we're going to start with is the photograph. And there are many photographs in many verses titled "The Photograph." We're going to start with the first one. So
prologue.
Can you hear this?
New country. The photograph. In a lifetime before mine, my parents, not yet my parents, only a slim girl the color of cinnamon, skirt swirled liquid about her knees as she dances, eyes cast downward, smiling shyly at a boy who mirrors her movement to the song, the little gap in his front teeth, cigarette tucked behind an ear and shirt unbuttoned down his chest, sepia hand longing for her waist, frozen, immortal in the photograph, wondering if they will ever touch.
So as we keep on going, first of all, it's going to be really, really hard for me to ever look at a photo of my parents and not say, those are my parents, not yet my parents. that refrain maintains. But I'm curious if this was one of the first poems that you wrote. Did you write it in order?
I primarily wrote the book in order. There's a lot of stuff that did not make it to the final draft.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff that had to then be written in the absence of some stuff that I had cut. But the first draft was I just like sat down, started at the beginning, finished at the end, because again, I didn't know what I was doing. So on top of trying to figure out plot and cause and effect and whatever, to then also write it out of order is just some like advanced level process that I don't know that I would have known how to like dip in and out of different sections of the book. I think because I only know how to engage with fiction as a reader, I had to just like go in and be like, okay, I'm like reading the novel as I'm writing it, and therefore it has to happen in order. Otherwise, everything is just going to collapse.
Okay,
so this was the first poem.
Yeah. I wrote for the book. So I want to. I chose a bunch of them, a bunch of the poems that deal with image and names and sort of relationships and home and all this stuff. I want to go to the second one that I chose. Let's pull this up.
Nima. Well, really, it's Nima, mispronounced at school to sound like the middle of the word animal, or stretched into a whining Nima, no letter in English for the snarling sound that centers my name, its little growl, aha. Nima, meaning grace. It would be funny if it weren't cruel. I stumble over my own overlarge feet and knock over the clay incense holder, its coal burning a perfect circle into the wooden table. I brush an uncoordinated elbow past the counter and the tray holding tea for guests, a full set of dishes, teapot and milk jug and sugar bowl and saucers and matching cups, painted with tiny flowers, goes crashing to the tiled floor. I trip on the carpet's hem and fall, chipping a tiny corner of my bottom front tooth, and in calling my name in exasperation, my mother calls for the grace I don't have.
So this is so beautiful. It's so beautifully put together. How quickly did you come up with the names? I know that might sound like a stupid question, but they're so meaningful. Did you go in knowing that Yasmeen would be a name and Nima would be a name?
So Yasmeen, I always knew would be the name, at least in the early drafts. I was using it as a placeholder because I too was almost named Yasmeen, and then there's a switch up in the 11th hour. But Ni'ma's name took forever to come to me because there's also so much hype around her name being important that it felt like every name I came up with did not like meet the expectation.
It's impossible for me to imagine a different name though, because of the dancing and the sort of juxtaposition between her gracelessness and gracefulness and stuff like that.
That all was added in maybe a second or third draft. In the first draft of the book, this like thing that I was trying to do that ultimately didn't work out is that we never learned her name, and that the book was going to end like right at the moment that her name was going to be uttered. But it just made a lot of the narration a little confusing. It's just easier when everyone has a name because you can like locate them in the story. And so she did not have a name for a lot of the early days of the life of this manuscript. And then what brought me to the name is that I turned in maybe the first draft of this manuscript to Chris Myers, and it also, the book didn't have a title yet. And I don't remember, there was some title that he was suggesting that I can't remember anymore, but he had said that what had led him to that title was the idea of there, but for the grace of God go I. And so when I was thinking at names, I kind of worked backwards from a definition to then be able to have something to say about the name. Yeah. And so in thinking about grace, I eventually, after like a couple of twists and turns, found my way to the name Nima.
And that line is in the novel.
I don't know.
There for the grace of God go. I think so.
It might be, even if it's not in the actual text of the novel, it's like definitely in like the vibe of the novel.
Yeah. Okay, I want to keep on going, and then I want to talk about the possible autobiographical. So I told you before the call, this is, I think, my favorite of the poems in the, and it suggests how funny you are, how funny this is. Why is this not in here? Let me find it real quick. I thought it was in here. Here it is.
Videos. What I'll never share with anyone is my true guilty pleasure. Every weekday after school, the hour or so before Haytham comes knocking on my door, when my mother is still hours away from returning home, I'll push the coffee table off to the side and watch American music videos, try to shape my limbs and waist to match their dancers, their high-heeled singers, and imagine my body as one of theirs instead. And I always feel a little less lonely, loving these songs that everyone loves too. But tonight, with the volume turned high, I do not hear my mother's key in the door, and she walks in to find me trying awkwardly to keep pace with the dance, missing the beat and then catching it only to miss it once again. And when I turn to see her standing, smiling, watching me, the shame courses hot through my now frozen limbs, and I am so embarrassed I start to cry. I scramble from my room and will not emerge for dinner, avoid her eyes for days until I'm sure she will not mention it.
I love that line. And I always feel less lonely loving these songs that everyone loves too. Is that, I mean, are you speaking autobiographically at this point? Are these moments that you're pulling from your childhood growing up in the DMV, or are you sort of imagining a different girl growing up?
I think the exercise I wanted to set for myself in this is to keep it as much in the realm of fiction as I could, because I'm never allowed to just make stuff up. In the rest of my writing life, there's kind of the assumption that my eye is an autobiographical eye. And so I'm a little bit more responsible for like, not necessarily reporting, but in like, if there's an event in a poem of mine, generally speaking, it feels better and more responsible if it is an event that has actually happened, that I've actually experienced. And so I'm not like speaking out of turn or speaking from someone else's experience or anything like that. Yeah. And so what really made this a party is that there's no Safia anywhere in it. Finally, I'm, so sick and tired of my own stuff. Yeah. And so all of the events are made up, but some of the, I guess, the psychology behind the events feels borrowed from my own psychology. I too love pop music because it makes me feel connected to just a greater thing, And when I first moved to the US, I made it like my mission to know every song that was playing on the radio, because it made me feel like I would finally be able to just like catch up to what everyone else had known all this time. I had like 10 years of American pop culture to catch up on, and I really applied myself to that.
Yeah. And it's like the characters doing the same thing, right? There's in both directions, where they're using music as a way to connect themselves, understanding the songs that everyone loves too, loving the songs that everyone loves too.
Yeah.
In sort of both time directions and also both sort of geographic directions. All right, let's keep going. Is this okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so what I love about, and I alluded to this earlier, is that there are many sort of repeated names as poems. So I want to find the second photograph. So I think it's this one, or this is not the second. There's a second I've chosen. I think there's other ones in between the first and the third. All right, so let's listen to this one.
I wander out the photographs. I wander out of the kitchen to explore the rest of the quiet house, its cool stone floors, its every wall hung heavy with pictures, creased with age and soft in gray tones, men in neat suits and cylindrical hats, each one jaunty with its tassel, men in crisp white tunics, a turban winding each head, and most of all, photographs crowded with women, covered and uncovered, some in sundresses flared around the ankle, enormous sunglasses, beehives and bouffants and big curls and coiffed waves, some swathed from neck to ankle in taubes, their colors lost to time in the grayscale of the camera. All of them my people, all of them unknown. I peer into each face and feel, for the first time, that I belong to other people. My face just a collage of all their faces. And beyond the gray of the photos, I swear I see my exact shade of brown, my exact eyes, each exact coil of my hair, inherited from the bodies in these photographs, and now my body, mine, my turn with these features. I turn to find Yasmeen beside me, gazing into these same photographs, hunger in her upturned face.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, what is it like to re-listen to this stuff?
So weird. So weird.
What is the experience? I'm so curious. Is it are you focusing on your voice? Do you cringe at the actual text, thinking, oh, this is awful, I need to change this is wrong? Or are you completely disassociated with it and you're like, who wrote this?
It's a little bit of the latter. This book, I think, because so much of it felt like a formal exercise, that it didn't leave a lot of space for me to really get possessive about it. It also might have been that it might have been because while I was writing this, I was also working on a second collection of poems, which inshallah is coming out this year, but who knows? It was supposed to come out last year. And so I think the element of multitasking, which is usually not how I work at all, means that my kind of attention and loyalty and all of that was split in between these projects. And so there's a lot of stuff that I have actually forgotten about this particular book. It also usually I only had one book out before this one, which is a collection of poems called The January Children. And I still feel like I know those poems very well because I toured with that book and I spent years reading and rereading and reciting those poems. I still probably have most of those poems memorized at this point, just from spending so much time with them. And just because the nature of a book tour is different with a novel, I'm just not reading as much of it out loud anymore. And I haven't reread the book since recording the audiobook, because at that point I was like, okay, it was, I did it all in one day over very many hours. I ate like 10,000 apples. And then after that, I was like, I need maybe a couple years away from the entirety of this text, because I don't know. I love it and I'm very proud of it, but it feels like it doesn't belong to me as much. And it might be because I am used to working from a place of relative autobiography. I feel like I brought these characters into the world and then they took on kind of a life of their own and they outgrew me and moved on and maybe also belong to other people now, in a way
Yeah.
that gives me less to hold on to than like poems based on my actual lived experience, because at least I'm still in these poems.
Yeah. It's interesting because like, I guess I have two questions related to that. One is, can you imagine this being performed by other people? Because when I was listening to it and reading it, to me, it was like this, like, I could imagine this being animated, in this like in this, what's that Pixar movie about the feeling one with Tina Fey?
Inside Out.
Inside Out, yeah.
Yeah.
Inside Out, or even the latest one, Soul. I was watching this and I was listening to it and I was imagining this animated, and I was like, I could imagine this even as like a play. I could imagine this being performed on stage, but in its entirety, and actually like cast. And I imagine
such a dream.
Yeah, like, but what is it like hearing the independent poems stand on their own? Are you like, Mikey, what are we doing? These don't make sense unless they're in order.
Well, I wonder, because I know what happens in the book, but I can only imagine what it would be like for someone who hasn't read the whole book to just hear these poems out of context. I don't think I wrote these to be standalone poems, because I was also so involved in trying to make sure that I like understood cause and effect or whatever.
Yeah.
It almost feels like, and this is like reading an out of context effect.
Yeah.
Or like reading a cause without knowing what happened. So I don't think I think some of the poems maybe could stand alone, especially some of the earlier world building ones could exist in the world alone if they wanted to. But I don't think that's what these poems were built to do.
Yeah. Okay, so there's two more, and the reason why I haven't given a big synopsis is because I'm hoping people go actually read the book, and then if they're listening to the podcast now and they haven't read it, go read it and come back and listen. That's kind of the idea of the series. But I want to play two more that I think both of which could actually be standalone poems. But I wonder if actually for the lesson, it actually makes sense to give context about what is happening at this precise moment. Would you mind giving a little context?
Sure. I'm like skimming it to try and remember where this even is.
This is the moment where Yasmeen is saying, is learning how to dance.
Is learning how to dance. And the setting of this poem is in like the Sudanese wedding culture that I grew up with, at least, because I know everyone kind of does their own thing. There's a thing called the ta'lima, where a group of women will gather to teach the bride-to-be how to do a lot of the traditional dances that she will then perform at her own wedding. And I've been to a couple as a kid, but I remember a few years ago when I was in Sudan, I went to like a friend's cousin's ta'lima. And it just is, one of those like kind of magical utopian femme spaces that you only ever read about. And so I didn't go into the book knowing that there were going to be a bunch of ta'lima scenes, but as Nima like goes back in time, is sort of like seeing her mother and her aunties and them and their kind of independent relationships to each other. It felt like a ta'lima just felt like the correct setting to kind of showcase some of the nuances of those relationships. And it also set it up so that I like took some liberties with the music, where none of the songs that are quoted are like traditional Jirtik or Rakis Arus songs, but it's a novel. It's not an anthology. So I just wanted a space where music and dance were the main event. In a way that kind of has cultural context and in like specifically a femme space. And so the lesson is set at a ta'lima. Nima and Yasmeen are watching Aisha, who's Nima's mother, teach Amal, I believe, who is the bride-to-be. And then as she's watching, Nima realizes that her mother has also like taught her some of these dances as well. So she gets up and starts to do them kind of out of habit. And Yasmeen is kind of not like a regular corporeal being, and so does not have much of a relationship to dance. And so there's this moment where she's like, "What are you doing?" And that kind of leads to a moment, kind of one of the first genuine moments of connection between Nima and Yasmeen. Yeah. Because before Yasmeen's kind of been lying to her about who she is, so this is their first like truthful moment of connection.
Correct. Okay, cool. So I'm going to play.
We could have tried
the lesson.
The song begins crackling through the speakers. Ya Habibi, ana ayyan. And I love this one. I sing it to myself and watch Aisha and Amal and all the women I'll never know, swaying and clapping and tossing their hair around to the song. And when it's done, something percussive and powerful takes its place, one of the traditional dances I love. And as my mother steps into the center of the circle, I feel myself rising to echo her. She strikes her foot against the dust, and I mirror her movements. I bring my hands to my face in the coy motion she taught me, and swing my hair from side to side. I watch her in her element, and feel myself in mine. Something in me clicks and stays put, and I feel suddenly fluent in my body, in the knowledge that my waist will move as I tell it to, that my back will arch in the exact shapes of hers. And as I twist my head in time to the song's final notes, I catch Yasmeen sitting up, alert, watching me in awe. How do you do that? I keep moving as I answer. What do you mean? I don't know. I don't know what to call it. It's like you were the music, like your body was the song. How do you do that? And it begins to dawn on me, slowly at first, then all at once. Yasmeen, have you never danced? And she cuts her eyes at me. Don't talk to me like you're sorry for me. In case you weren't following what I've been trying to tell you, I haven't exactly had a body before this stupid little adventure. So no, I guess I've never danced before. And wait, no, what are you doing? And I am pulling her up to join me, her protest slowing as I arrange her limbs, as I turn to face her. Okay, first with your right. And at first her movements are jerky, uncomfortable. But by the fourth song, her eyes are closed and the music has settled itself into her muscles, and the movements have begun to take, mirroring mine. And a few feet away, my mother puts her body through the exact motions, the three of us in parallel.
Okay. So I'm going to play one last, because we already sort of talked about this. I'm going to play one last poem before we wrap up. And this one, for me, is definitely something that could stand alone. And this is like a love letter to human life, essentially. I think I'm just going to play it, and then we're going to talk about this, and then I'm going to do the quick Q&A, and then we'll open up to the audience, because I think there's going to be a lot of questions. I love this poem.
Yasmeen continues. All the stuff you love, the music, the dancing, your mom, Haytham, I don't have any of it. I don't have anything like it, and it's all I want. I want a favorite song, and I want to know if a guava tastes the way it looks. I want to shine with sweat and change colors in the sun. I want to watch television and memorize whole stretches of movie dialogue like you and Haytham do. I want the feeling of sitting in hot water and to be afraid of heights or dogs or the dark. I want to ride the bus and give someone directions. I want to shell pistachios and bite my nails and get the hiccups from laughing too hard. I want to shield my eyes from the sun. I want eyes that are mine to shield and skin that is mine. I want goosebumps and armpits that go damp, and I want arms that are too hairy or feet that are too large or anything. I'll take anything, any version of a life. And with a gasp, she sits up, my features blurring out of her face. I don't think I was supposed to tell you any of that.
So going back to this idea of the overall story and the broader like theme and message, when you were sort of figuring out the plot, did you have the sort of the deeper theme sorted out when you were writing 5 pages of, you know, stanzas on leaves? Did you know this is really what I'm trying to get to? I'm trying to get to this idea that, you know, home is in the humanity of your own community and your own life and the people that surround you. Is that what you're trying to get to? Or did Yasmeen and Nima take you there?
I think they took me there. I think I always knew that the book was going to engage with some idea of like an alternate self or a parallel life, but I don't know that I knew where it was going to end up. I also, for like a lot of the drafting process, I didn't really know how to use Yasmeen as a character. I think I had her just kind of be this like benevolent guiding spirit who would just be around whenever Nima had questions about the magic of it all. But there was no real story for her. She just was like, you know, a little angel sitting on Nima's shoulder, and that's it. And I kept writing myself into dead ends.
Yeah, I mean, they have an adversarial relationship at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, no, Yasmeen being kind of a villain really like opened up the whole plot to me because I knew that it was important for there to be this like spooky alternate version of Nima, but it just didn't occur to me early on that was like scary at all or adversarial at all. I knew that I wanted Nima to like face this alternate version of herself and then in the facing come to some sort of conclusion. But I kept hitting dead ends and she like needed a little bit of nudging to get to any sort of conclusion.
It's interesting because for me, as I was reading this, and I'm probably projecting, there is this like, Yasmeen is like, in many ways, is like the hypothetical cousin in the old country, 4th cousin in the old country, who is like, you have music videos, you have McDonald's, you have Air Jordans, you have 24-hour electricity. How dare you complain? And of course, that's not how these real humans actually feel, right? But that's the rap. That's the thing that your parents say to you. Yeah. Don't you dare complain. Your 4th cousins in the old country would die for this life. And so was it hard to sort of give Yasmeen a voice, or that's who you were tapping into once you figured out, oh, this is who this person is?
I think it wasn't necessarily hard to give Yasmeen a voice because Yasmeen ended up being kind of a mouthpiece for my own frustrations with Nima at that point, you know, where like, yes, it's hard to be a teenager. And yes, a lot of Nima's life is genuinely difficult and sad. And also there are moments where I just was like, girl, enough.
Yeah.
So I needed, like short of like inserting myself into the book as a character, I needed a mouthpiece to be like, girl, enough.
Yeah. Your mom saw you dancing, get over it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I want to move to the quick Q&A, and then we're going to open up to questions in the audience. And if there's time at the end, we'll come back and listen to some more. So what are you reading right now?
I just finished reading Intimacies by Katie Kitamura, maybe? Intimacies. Okay. Which was like a very quick, very quick and crisp read. There's like no decoration in the language at all, which I really enjoyed. I am currently reading The Committed by Viet Thanh Nguyen, but I have to return it to the library in 24 hours and I'm only a few pages in, so I might spend the rest of the day like speed reading this ebook. And then I recently, more as like an experiment than anything, to just like see the extent of my access to the language. But I got the Anne Carson, is it a chapbook? Maybe it's like one of her little books. It's called The Albertine Workout. I just bought it in Spanish to just see what happens.
Okay.
I might get nothing from it, but just, you know, as an
Only
experiment.
one way to try. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so who would you love to shadow for a day, Narma style, past or present, floating next to them? I usually say in like a Ghost of Christmas Past, but خلاص من هلا I'm going to say it in a Narma style.
Who would I love to shadow? I mean, this is maybe too easy an answer given the content of the book, but I would love to like secretly observe my mother as like her younger pre-parental self and just like see what she's like, see what she was into.
Yeah.
And then also, I know I already brought her up, but would love to shadow Anne Carson for a day just because she's so brilliant and so strange that I cannot imagine what she is up to all day.
Amazing. Okay. Two more. What do you think people most misunderstand about your work?
So I think my work is pretty funny. No one else thinks my work is funny, except for you. So
except for me, I said it to you before the call. Yeah. I was like, you're hilarious.
Yeah, no, I like will be like writing these poems and like having a little chuckle to myself, and then everyone will be like, "Oh my god, it's so tragic." But I think my work is pretty funny. Yeah,
I mean, in the words of Maya Angelou, when somebody tells you who they are, remember them, believe them the first time. Yeah. And your handle is Safia Mafia. So how much do you need to know about your sense of humor? Okay. Outside your profession, whose work inspires you?
Outside of my profession, I really love, again, much like now, I swear this book was not autobiographical, but I really love music videos. I think they kind of, a good music video feels to me like a good poem. It creates kind of the same sensations for me. So love music videos. I love fashion. I love spending time with friends of mine who work in other fields. So my friend Adam Besa works in fashion. He makes like leather goods. And just hearing him talk about his process and the things he's learning and the things that he's observing ends up being like quite instructive for me to then take to my own work. I think I just learn a lot from witnessing other people's ways of looking at things, and especially, you know, the detail-oriented arts. I think I learn a lot about like paying super close attention from just watching people work in other forms and then having to translate it back into a poetry space.
Cool. Great. Okay, Rana, you are up first. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, hi, thank you. This was fantastic, and I loved your book. But I was wondering about the cover, and if you had, it's so memorable, it's so vivid. You know, the colors, it's very hard to forget. So I was thinking, did you have any say in the art of the cover, and were there any versions that you had to choose from to reach this version?
So this cover ended up being a really pleasant surprise because all of the earlier covers that I'd been shown were illustrated. And they were beautiful illustrations, but I think there were a couple issues that came up with them. Some of them felt a little bit too young for kind of the like darker spaces that the book inhabits. Some of them, it just was very difficult to tell that the figure in the illustration was meant to be a Black girl. And that hurt my feelings. And this, like, after just like endless back and forth, this image kind of just came out of left field because it's based on an existing photograph of the Sudanese Somali ceramicist Dina Nursati, and she just like independently done this photo shoot with a friend of hers. Dina is friends with Chris Myers, who's my publisher. And he kind of, after hearing my frustrations with the existing covers, kind of just like went and like got her permission to use this image. And then the like flowers and the butterflies and all the stuff that makes it kind of ambiguous about whether or not it's a photo or a painting is by Shaylin Wallace, who has a series of just like Black people and flowers. And so I didn't know that it was going to be a photo. I didn't know that it was allowed for it to be a photo. But it just, when I finally saw it, I was like, finally, no ambiguity. This is a Sudanese person. It like has like the colors and the mood that I feel like I see when I read this book. And so it finally felt like the correct articulation of the pages inside the book.
Amazing. Thanks, Sudana. Amani, you're up next. If you want to unmute yourself.
But thank you so much for this event. I really enjoyed it. Safia, I would like to know what university you joined in US. I remember you made a live before, but I didn't pay attention to that. And which character in the book you see yourself Yani, into? Thank you.
Great.
So for my bachelor's, I went to New York University. There's a college within NYU called the Gallatin School of Individualized Study, where you get to make up your major. And so I majored in 10,000 random things that have nothing to do with my life today. I think I just got a little bit too much freedom. And then I afterwards went and did a Master's of Fine Arts at the New School in creative writing with a concentration in poetry. And that primarily was because I was not ready to leave New York yet. And I had just graduated from undergrad, and my family was like, you're not just gonna stay in New York to like find yourself. You either get a real job in your field or you go to grad school. And so I was like, great, I'm going to grad school. And then the character, who I don't know if this character corresponds to my actual self, but corresponds to the self I wish, like this is a character I wish I were more like, but I really hate them. I know you're not supposed
I was going to say that.
characters.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I know you're not, maybe not supposed to like choose favorites among your children or whatever, but hate them is my favorite.
He's the coolest. Yeah, that's who I thought you were going to say. Okay, Waad, you're up next.
Hi.
Hi.
So my question is about Sudan. So I noticed that Sudan isn't actually mentioned by name in the book, but reading through it, it was pretty obvious to me because that's my background. But just curious, like what the intention was behind that to keep Sudan's name out of the book.
So I wanted there to be almost two different versions of the book. I wanted one version to be for Sudanese people with a Sudanese background, people with the knowledge of Sudan and Sudanese culture, because that in that version of the book, it's like quite obvious that the country is Sudan. But for people who don't have a knowledge of Sudan, aren't Sudanese, and might go to this book to answer questions about Sudan, I didn't want to give those people something like easy and unnuanced to be able to say about Sudan, because this is a work of fiction. This is not a work of anthropology. And so I wanted kind of both to write a bunch of like little dog whistles for Sudanese people to be like, obviously, you know, there's like, she's like dancing to Gisma and going to the Bigada, where else could it be? But I didn't want, you know, just like someone else to be like, oh my God, it's like so backwards and violent in Sudan. So I wanted to kind of keep those people, that reader, shut out of the fact of the Sudanese-ness of the book. I didn't want to give that person any easy answers about Sudan. I wanted to make that person have to work to try and figure out if this country even exists. And I also, in the fiction of it all, wanted to make sure that I was giving myself the freedom to render a version of Sudan without being responsible for getting it exactly correct. You know, there's like some stuff in the timeline that's lost on me where I was just waiting for, because, you know, this happened to me with the January Children, where it's a book of poems. It's not of like historical or anthropological text, but there was just stuff that would end up in a poem that I'd like heard somewhere or maybe misremembered. And then after the book was like published and bound and printed, some relative would be like, actually, this is incorrect. And so I wanted space to be incorrect, basically. I wanted space to make things up while also drawing from actual Sudan without being responsible for getting it exactly correct about actual Sudan, and also without being responsible for representing actual Sudan to someone who may not have context for it. I did not want to be like the first line of information for that person about Sudan, because who am I?
Yeah. Okay. The last question comes from Anne.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
I was curious, especially towards the end of the book, how you decided that Nirma would have that profound realization that she had, especially at such a young stage in her life. I feel like that kind of self-acceptance from children of immigrants, you know, may happen much later, but I was moved by how young she was when she had it.
Thank you. I wanted to give Nima the gift of coming to that realization in adolescence, because it took me forever. And I feel like I wasted a lot of time like being hung up on things that I did not need to be hung up on, or waiting to like graduate into some identity or something like that. And I just feel like I wasted a lot of time, and I like wasted a lot of appreciation for the communities that I did have. And so I wanted to give Nima the gift of getting to that realization while she still was enmeshed in that community. I grew up in like a super Sudani community in the DC area, and just took it for granted. I just was like, well, obviously Sudanese people are everywhere. They will always be around. I don't need to like stop and smell the roses. And then I left DC, and I had some Sudanese community in New York, but it was different. It was mostly just people my age. It wasn't like the full like family experience that I had grown up with. And then I moved to California, and for like the first couple months, I was like, where is everyone?
Where are the aunties?
Exactly. So it turns out they're there. I found them. But at first, I didn't realize what I'd had until I left. And so it took that for me to be like, oh, I like that belonging that I so badly craved. I had it the whole time, and I wasn't able to see it for what it was. I was always looking beyond it for the thing that I thought I should have instead, and did not spend enough time being grateful for what I did have. The fact that there's like a Sudanese grocery store in DC, I took that for granted, you know? And so I wanted to give this character the gift of coming to that without having to leave. Well, you know, she kind of leaves, but she still lives in this community.
Okay, I'm going to end on one final poem, and then we'll wrap up, if that's okay with you.
The photographs. And in the apartment outside, all but one of the photographs of my father have disappeared, replaced instead by the ones from the portal, the one with me as a newborn, framed in the living room, the one at the airport, taped to the mirror of my mother's dresser, in the one on the coffee table we perch by a bathtub crowded with paper boats, and in the absence of his face, I finally pay attention to the others, all over the apartment, that have been there all along. My grandmother, my mother surrounded by friends and smiling enormously into the camera, my mother grinning beside Khaltuhala, my mother holding a bouquet of flowers, surrounded by girls in dancers' clothes. What is newest is a poster advertising the Banat al-Ni'ma dance school, and on it a photograph of my mother mid-step, and across from her, in the exact movement, is me. And when I pull my tin box from beneath the bed, The one photograph remains, my parents at the party, and with it is a new one of my mother, here in America, in full color at some recent party, yellow dress swirling bright around her, head thrown back, her mouth open mid-laugh or mid-lyric, arms stretched above her head as if in victory. Aisha, bright and full of living.
Safia, thanks so much for doing this. It was a real pleasure to be able to go through this with you. And also thanks for writing the book. I think that the book is weirdly or slyly more autobiographical than maybe you're willing to admit.
Maybe. Thank you so much for having me and for spending time with the book.
Yeah, it's amazing. So everyone, you can go onto our website to find this podcast in a few days. Tomorrow we have another event with Zaina Masri, who is an amazing historian of graphic design. She wrote a book called Off the Wall that details political posters from the Lebanese Civil War. And she has a new book coming out as well, or that just came out about a similar subject. So that's going to be really powerful. And Safia, thanks again for doing this.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.